Welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors, everyone. This is Rachelle Vanderzanden here with Corey Janoff.
Hello.
Hello. Today, we wanted to talk a little bit about pensions. And this is something that people have often heard about, but don't necessarily know exactly how they work or if they might have one. And sometimes we have clients who are like, hey, do I get a pension? Like, is this available at my job? And you never really know until you get the job and you look at all the benefits and everything like that. But today, we're going to spend some time breaking down how they work, where you might get one, if you might qualify, like if they are beneficial or not, how you kind of like calculate what kind of benefit you might get out of them, and all the nuts and bolts that have to do with pension plans.
And when we say pensions, we're specifically referring to defined benefit retirement plans, which we'll get into what that means here in a second. I know a lot of people, often a little bit older than Rochelle and I, will just refer to the retirement plan as a pension because that's kind of what the word was when they grew up. You have a pension. It's your retirement pension. Um, but there's a stark difference between the two main categories of retirement plans, which are defined benefit, which is kind of the old school pension annuity type plan where you're promised a certain amount of money in retirement, you know, typically based on number of years worked and your earnings, versus a defined contribution plan, which is your 401k, 403b type account where you can contribute a set amount per year, or I should say a maximum amount per year. You can always do less than that if you want to, but you're defining how much you're contributing rather than how much you're receiving on the back end. Whereas with the traditional defined benefit pension plans, they're defining how much you will receive on the back end, and then they reverse solve for how much is required to contribute to the plan in order to promise that benefit in the future. So it's a little bit trickier. You're trying to predict the future, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a couple other big differences with the defined benefit pension. The employer takes on the investment risk versus the employee. So with a 401k, 403b, the employer says, here's your retirement plan. Maybe we'll match some contributions to it, but from there, it's on you. You invest the money how you want to. Um, and whatever it's worth when you retire, great. That's what you have. Whereas, so the risk is on you to make it work for yourself. Whereas with the defined benefit, the risk is on the employer to make sure the investment performance keeps up with in congruence with their contributions to provide enough money to pay those promised benefits. And because of that, I think that's why pensions are kind of going the way of the dinosaur. Fewer and fewer employers offer them, fewer and fewer employees are covered by them through their employer. Now, pretty much everyone's covered by the biggest pension out there, Social Security, which we'll touch on here in a second. But it was a much easier calculation when people basically worked until they died, or they worked until they couldn't work anymore, and a few years later they were dead. So the employer knew, all right, we'll give you a few years worth of income after you retire, and then you're off the books. Now they could be on the hook for 30, 40, 50 years. They might end up paying you more in retirement than they paid you when you were working. That's the case, where Rochelle and I live in Oregon with the PERS plan, the tier one PERS employees, like they make more money in retirement than they did when they were working, and it's causing some significant financial challenges for the state. But of course, the state employees are not gonna, the people who run the state are state employees. They're not gonna change the rules because it would just hurt themselves. So it's fun politics.
Politics. Yeah, I think with the pensions, those defined benefit plans, there's a few different ways that they can be set up and be funded. Sometimes it's like your employer sets it up and they put money in there on your behalf, and that's it. Like they're funding it. They're trying to make sure that their employees have a certain benefit amount when they come out in retirement and things like that. Other times it can be like, we will contribute to this pension plan, but you're going to have to make an equivalent contribution. So it could be like you put in 9%, they put in 9%, and then all of that money goes into the pension. And now it's basically being invested within the pension so that they can cover those benefits for retirees on the back end. I think a good example of one like basically a pension that works like that is Social Security, which Corey mentioned earlier. But basically, what's happened is that you put in 6.2% of your income up to a cap. Like at some point, like you don't have to contribute anymore.
Like
And your employer,
170,000
I
or
think it's
so.
170,000 in 2025. Yeah. And then your employer also puts in that 6.2% up to $170,000 of your wages. And then those are the contributions that everyone basically that's working and covered by Social Security contributes into this plan. And then on the back end, you get a calculated benefit based on how much you have paid into Social Security and how many years you've worked and all of that kind of stuff.
And you
If
can
you're self,
see now
yeah,
how much your benefit will be in retirement. Like if you log
yeah,
into Social Security's website, it'll basically project out, assuming you earn the same income for the next ever. All right, at
mm-hmm,
age 62, at age 67, at age 70, this is what
yep,
your benefit will be in today
yep.
dollars. Now that'll adjust for inflation over time, but that's what they're promising you.
I think it's helpful to see it even in today
Yeah.
dollars, though.
Oh yeah.
Like, like if I could I cover my expenses with this level of income. So that's that website that you can go and kind of check that out. It's www.ssa.gov, and anyone can log in and set up and like an account, and it pulls in all your wages that have been reportable on your taxes over the last however many years. And it's actually kind of cool to look at. I think one thing, and this is a problem that pensions have had in general, is that if it is underfunded, it is hard to pay out the benefits and it becomes a challenge. Social Security has that same challenge. So just be aware that like the money flowing in and the money flowing out are not going to be great, starting in like 2032 or something like that. It's basically like, okay, this math doesn't math anymore. So when you go in and you create a login and you look at your estimated benefit, maybe like undersell it to yourself. Let's estimate we get maybe 50% or 70% of that because it's very likely that you'll have reduced benefits unless they dramatically change things with Social Security. So just
I'm of
one thing to
the
keep in mind.
opposite opinion that
Yeah.
they're more likely to change things than reduce everyone's
Like
benefits.
increased taxes. Yeah. I,
Yeah,
I
so
think
like
that's probably true as well.
that's what they did back in the 80s. So in the 80s, Social Security was they ran out of money. There was like no money left in the trust fund and they implemented some measures that gradually increased the tax rate to what it is today, the 6.2%. Previously it was like 5%. And then they delayed the age in which people could start claiming benefits. So I would imagine, now my crystal ball isn't very clear, but I would imagine something similar is going to happen over the next handful of years, by 2033 at the latest, probably. Hey, we're going to need to gradually increase the tax rate, maybe delay the age by a year or two in which people can start collecting benefits, make some minor tweaks here, maybe increase the wage cap in which Social Security taxes you on. So instead of capping it at 170, maybe we go up to 230,000 of income, or the Democrats have their way, unlimited income is taxed. But yeah, so we'll see some changes over the coming years that'll tweak it to make it viable and still be able to provide you those promised benefits. Because I think it's like 40% of Americans rely exclusively on Social Security for their retirement income. So it'd be pretty detrimental to a lot of people if benefits were just reduced by half.
Right. And I think that like if you adjust for age, it's more like older retirees that are more dependent on Social Security and like younger working folks that are more scared of it, and are actively saving on their own. Yeah, but I would be really surprised if they like reduced people's benefits who are already receiving it. Like that wouldn't make any sense at all. But anyway, any sorts of number of ways that they could kind of fix this problem, shall we say. Pensions have had similar problems in the past, and sometimes you see like if you participated in this like pension before this date, you get this benefit. But if you started after this year, then you actually get this benefit. And there's a lot of like grandfathered in types of things where like if you have an existing pension and it's problematic with the funding, it may be if you're an older worker and you've been there a long time, your benefits just better than for like the younger workers who are there. So we see lots of different things like that in terms of how we can fix these problems. Pensions have been around for a long time, since like late 1800s, early 1900s. They started to kind of increase in popularity like in the early 1900s until like the 1970s when we introduced 401ks. And then it was like as employers had this other option where they could take some of that responsibility off of their own shoulders and put it on the employee's shoulders to save, to invest, all of that kind of stuff, then we see this like movement away from pensions, especially in the private sector. There's still lots of like public sector pension plans, but it's much less common in the private sector nowadays.
Yeah, so public versus private. If you're employed by the state, the federal government, a municipality, a public university, which is basically the state that you're employed by, there's a decent chance you are either covered by a pension or have the option to participate in it. So we'll see this frequently with clients who are going to work at the state university. It's like when you start working there, you have your benefits orientation, et cetera, and they give you a set number of days to decide which retirement plan you want to participate. You got to pick one. You either do the like public employee retirement pension plan where you contribute X amount, the employer contributes X amount, and and it's based on a formula of years worked times income, and then that's what your guaranteed benefits are in retirement. Or you could do a defined contribution plan, often a 401A is the technical term in the tax code that it's categorized under, but it's employer contributes a set amount, you contribute a set amount, you can't change it, but then you get to pick and choose what you invest in. When you leave the employer, you take it with you. You could roll it to your next employer, roll it to your IRA when you retired. So you have more control and flexibility over how you use that money. The oftentimes the contribution is similar. The employer is like, all right, we're going to contribute this much to either plan. It's just you pick. Do you want the guaranteed one that provides promised benefits in retirement, or do you want to have more control over the investments? And if you look at historical investment growth averages, all else being equal, you'll probably end up with more money in a defined contribution plan than the defined benefit plan because in order to provide a guarantee, they can't have too lofty of an expectation. So they often set the return target at like 3, 4, 5, maybe 6% average over the long run. It's often invested heavily in bonds, treasuries, so that they know exactly what they're receiving in interest, and it makes it a lot easier to plan versus investing in stocks where one year you're up 30%, next year you're down 20%, next year you're up 23%, and it's just a roller coaster ride. And every single year, the payout formula is going to change, and it becomes really challenging from a planning standpoint to provide those promised benefits. So pensions, the defined benefit ones, are typically invested much more conservatively in order to keep the hurdle low enough to jump over time versus if you invest aggressively in the stock market, no guarantees, which is what the pension is providing is guarantees, but odds are your long-term performance will probably be better, therefore resulting in a larger pool of money available to you in retirement, which you then could just throw in an annuity if you wanted the guaranteed income stream in retirement, and it'd be a larger income stream at that point. But the onus is on you. The risk is on you. It's not on the employer.
Mhm. One thing that I didn't write down as a note here, but is also relevant, is that sometimes these public sector pensions are there in place of Social Security contributions. So that is like we've been talking a lot about Social Security. Sometimes it's an either or thing, not a both thing. So as you get started in a new job and like you're reviewing retirement benefits and things like that, that's a good thing to keep an eye out for because you don't want to have earmarked in your head, hey, I'm going to have this pension and I'm also going to have Social Security if you're not even paying into Social Security. I know like the California state pension, I think that one in some cases is like a Social Security substitute. The one that like the UC system uses is a Social Security substitute. So it's just like something to be aware of. Just make sure that you're not double counting what you think you're going to get in retirement.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
private employers still do offer the traditional pensions, as the quote unquote golden handcuffs, if you will, that incentivize you to stay working there because you have a pretty significant benefit promised to you in retirement. Kaiser is probably the most notable one in the medical world. That if you work there X number of years, you're eligible for pension benefits, and it can be pretty appealing, especially if you're going to stay there your whole career. And then, using again the medical crossover, there are some pharmaceutical companies and other healthcare companies that offer it. Like I have a client at Johnson and Johnson that's covered by a pretty attractive pension plan. If you stay there for your whole career, it replaces like 70% of your wages. It's pretty insane.
Hmm.
Um, and others like UPS, the mail delivery company, like they've got a pension that they've had to change. Older people are in one system, they've frozen it for younger people and revamped it to make it less costly to the employer. But
Yeah. I know
it's
lots of airlines still offer pensions for their pilots, especially.
yep.
Yeah.
If you work for the VA or any other federal entity like the NIH, you're going to be covered by the FERS federal pension system, where I think after 5 years, you're eligible for benefits. You contribute, I think it's 4.4% of your wages. The government puts another chunk in, and after 20 years of employment, you've reached the maximum benefit, I believe. Um, some private companies, probably more common than a traditional pension, offer cash balance plans to employees. Not super common, but we see it probably more than your regular old school pension. And we've done, I think, some episodes on cash balance plans if you just search through the archives here. But that's something where it's technically a defined benefit plan, but you don't usually ever get to the point where you receive defined benefits. Usually, when you leave the employer, you end up just rolling it into your next employer's retirement plan or rolling it to your IRA when you retire. You can set them up if you're self employed for yourself. So you can put a ton of money in pre tax for retirement via these vehicles, which is pretty appealing for some people that are looking to save on taxes while saving more for retirement. And then if you're self-employed, once you're ready to retire, you just terminate the plan and then roll the money to your IRA. So you never actually need to worry about that promised benefit payment or receiving it in retirement, because you just turn it into a normal investment vehicle at the point where you stop working.
Hmm. Yeah. If you are working with an employer that offers a pension, you may or may not qualify for it, just depending on how long you work there. So it's good to have a good understanding of how long do I have to be here to actually qualify for this pension and all those other things. So there's almost always required years of service. Actually, I don't think I've ever seen a plan that didn't have required years of service. Usually it's at least 5. Sometimes if you're contributing to that plan and your employer is contributing to that plan, if you don't get to that like mark where it's vested and where you can qualify for a pension benefit, usually there's a portion that like your contributions that can be cashed out and rolled over into like an IRA or something like that. So that's one thing. It usually doesn't have a lot of significant growth, so if you had a 401k and you put money in there and it's invested in the stock market, cool. Like we've had some growth, or maybe we've had some downturns, like we've had some investment fluctuations. With pension plans, a lot of times it's like you get a credit of like 2% per year or something minimal like that for any dollar amounts that you want to roll over out of the pension. There's usually like, or not usually, I think always like a calculation of benefit. It's I think always kind of based on the formula used for like your years of service. So, how many years of service do you have? If you worked part time part of those years, then you may only get like a partial credit for those years that you worked part time. And then they take like an average of your highest income, usually over like 3 to 5 years. So, if you have kind of a typical career path where your income increased a little bit each year as you worked, maybe that last like 3 to 5 years of your income, what was your average salary for those years? And then there's usually like a small percentage that you get a credit on per year of service. And then that calculates your benefit. So it's not designed to replace your entire income most of the time. It's usually just like a percentage of it, maybe 40% or something like that. And then that is like a pre-tax benefit. So generally you're going to pay taxes on those distributions when you get them. Um, when it pays out to you, it's structured like an annuity where you get like a monthly benefit or an annual benefit. Sometimes there's a cost of living adjustment, sometimes there's not. I feel like it's more typical for them to not have a cost of living adjustment, but it probably depends on like whether it's a public or a private pension as well. But you get kind of a guarantee, like we know it's going to be at least this much per month moving forward. And that's what I have. Even if there's not an inflation adjustment, that's going to be really helpful. And then you can also pick different ways to structure the annuity payout in some situations. So it could be like, I just want to have the same amount every month for the rest of my life, no matter how long that is. Okay, like that's one option. But you can also select options like, okay, I want a guaranteed income stream for both me and my spouse. And then that's going to be maybe a slightly lower payout because it's based on two people's life expectancy, not just one. And so that can potentially like help you cover income for when you've passed away as well. Or you can select options where I'm guaranteed to receive a benefit for 10 years. If I pass away, that benefit is going to go to someone else because I'm not super confident in my life expectancy. And if I pass away earlier, I don't want to leave my company in this pension with all of this money that I never got to get from them. Like that would suck. So there's lots of different ways that you can structure that. And any way that you do it, it's going to affect the benefit amount a little bit as well.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
If
Yep.
you're given a choice between a defined benefit pension and the regular defined contribution 403b 401k type account, which is better? Um, it depends. As with everything, it depends. This is a common, as I mentioned earlier, like if you're a state employee or working for the university hospital, they often will offer you, hey, you could have the public employee retirement pension, or we could do a fixed contribution to the 401a, or it's a defined contribution plan instead, and the onus is on you to invest it prudently. Um, it really does depend. Do you plan to stay at this place for your entire career or only for a few years? What's the vesting schedule? If you're only going to be there for a few years till you reach the public service loan forgiveness on your student loans, and then you're planning to bounce and go elsewhere. Well, if it's a 5-year vesting schedule and you're only going to stay for 3 years, probably not worth doing the pension plan, probably worth doing the defined contribution plan. How robust are the pension benefits relative to the contributions? Like you can do a calculation. It's like, all right, we're contributing this much per year to the plan based on my salary. If we do that every year for the next 30, 40 years, this is what the benefit would be. All right, backwards math, what's that anticipated rate of return? Oh, it's the equivalent of a 2% rate of return. So I could just instead invest the same amount in treasury bonds right now and get double the return. Like that's not a very appealing pension. But with some pensions, it's like, hey, this is like a guaranteed 7% rate of return on my money. All right, I'll take that. Sign me up. Um, how much does the employer contribute to one plan versus the other? Maybe they contribute a lot to that pension plan, but they only contribute, 3% to the matching on the other plan. So you potentially get more money out of it if you do the pension, or vice versa. They might want to incentivize you to do the defined contribution plan so they don't have the promised benefit on the hook. So they'll say, hey, do this defined contribution plan and we'll give you more money as a result. We don't want to promise benefits in the future. So, also, do you prefer more control over how your money is invested? And what you can do with it when you leave the employer versus if you're just stuck in this pension, your options are often rather limited until you're reaching retirement age. And then, do you prefer more of a guaranteed income stream in retirement, or are you willing to take the risk and whatever your investment is worth, that's what you have to live on in retirement? To each their own. Some people like that comforting feeling of I have X amount of money guaranteed each year in retirement, and that's helps you sleep well at night. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you could invest, see the money hopefully grow over time, and then convert part of your retirement plan into an annuity to provide that guaranteed income stream in retirement. So that's also an option as well. But yeah, case by case for everyone, as with all things financial planning.
hmm I think a lot of times when employers offer like this whole list of retirement plan options, it can be really, really challenging to understand them all. Luckily, a lot of the employers that have like just more complex retirement benefits often offer like voluntary seminars and things like that where you can go and you can hear like whoever's running the plan kind of talk about it. Do that. It makes so much sense. Just get as much information as you can. Listen to the people that are very familiar with the plan, talk about it so you have a better understanding of it. And probably do it repeatedly because these are very complex tools and it can be really complicated and hard to understand. And then when we're thinking about like how do we decide what to do here, like just like with any employer benefits, try to consider like the numerical value of any retirement plan contributions with like one prospective employer over another. So if you're looking at like a Kaiser type employer versus working for the local university, like how much money do they put into retirement plans for you? And if they're putting money in the retirement plans for you, how long do you have to actually be there to see any benefit out of that? Because for some of these employers, it's like you don't even get anything unless you stay there at least 5 years. And do you think like there's a really good chance that this is going to be a good forever job? Do you think that like maybe this is a good right now job, but not a good forever job? Like all of those things should be things that you're considering. And you can look at all of those. I think you can also like once we have a good idea of how much is going into these retirement plans, we can also look at the pay and we can do a better job of comparing apples to apples. Because even if like at the local university you get $200,000 and then at like a local private employer you get 220, but the university is putting 40 grand in your retirement plans in one way, shape, or form, and the other one is only putting like $10,000 in, like okay, like we're not looking at the same thing necessarily. So all of those are things that we should be considering.
And
Yeah.
lastly, with pensions, that the whole idea of the guarantees might sound appealing, but the guarantees are only as good as the issuing entity. So we've seen this over time. A lot of states, municipalities, companies haven't had the money to make good on their promised benefits and have had to change their pension plan around. And it's created a lot of issues for some employees and retirees as well. Um, Usually, when it happens, like Rachelle mentioned earlier, it's hey, all these older employees are grandfathered in, but if you're below a certain point, then we're changing the formula around and it's not going to be as lucrative moving forward. But like if you were banking on that pension benefit and they can't pay it, well, that's, what are you going to do? Nothing. They don't have the money. So, um, go pound sand, unfortunately. So it's one of those where it on paper they say it's guaranteed, but until you actually see that money hit your wallet, um, and until you eventually kick the bucket, like you're only like it's not for certain. It's only as good as they are financially. So you want to make sure your employer is very financially strong and stable, but that could change over time. Like we've seen states declare bankruptcy to get out of paying their pension benefits and have to change the formula around. Um, I think that was in what, Wisconsin, maybe, I don't know, like a decade or so ago.
Hmm.
It created a big uproar, and some other places have had similar issues. You see strikes at like auto unions and other states that it's like, hey, we can't pay these benefits. So I think keep that in mind too. Um, that pension really isn't guaranteed until you're receiving the check.
Yeah. There are some protections in place, but not for your full pension benefit. I think that's the
Yeah.
other thing. So there's like a pension benefit guarantee corporation, which is literally like a giant organization that backs up pensions. And you have to pay like a certain amount of insurance as an employer into this pension fund. But if the pension just totally folded, that doesn't guarantee that you get your full benefit. It just guarantees that you get some portion of that benefit. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, I've had some clients who are kind of approaching retirement age with these pension type things. And if they're just completely uncomfortable with depending on the pension to pay them a benefit month in and month out, like often you can elect to take a lump sum contribution that's whatever they decide is the equivalent of what your pension benefit would be. And you can move that into a rollover IRA. So even if you have a defined benefit plan, sometimes you have the option of taking all that money out and like just putting it in a rollover IRA or something like that.
Yeah, and sometimes that lump sum withdrawal is more attractive than the annual income. When you again do the math,
Yeah.
it's like if you can get 4 or 5% or more of that lump sum every year. Like let's say the lump sum is $100,000 and the annual income stream equivalent, like it's like, hey, you could either roll this 100,000 over to your IRA or we'll give you 7,000 a year for the rest of your life. All right, well, that's like a 7% uh withdrawal rate. That's going to be hard to beat. Let's take the 7% withdrawal rate. But if it's like, hey, you get 2,000 a year or 100,000 lump sum, okay, I'm going to take the lump sum because I could
Yeah.
probably just throw that 100 grand into a regular investment and get 4 or 5% for the rest of my life
Right. Like
from
put it
it.
in bonds and you get more
Yeah,
income out of it.
like a safe withdrawal rate for most retirees in their mid 60s, call it. You could probably withdraw 4 to 5% of your portfolio value with very little risk of ever running out of money over time, even with adjusting that withdrawal for inflation. So
Hmm.
that's where we kind of look at, all right, what's more attractive, the lump sum or the pension income?
Yep. So lots of things to consider here. As a physician, you may not have access to a pension, but when you're looking at prospective employers, it's definitely something to look for and just make sure you understand it if that is part of the benefits package.
Yep, yep.
Thank
Well,
you for
thanks for
listening.
listening. We'll see you next
Yeah.
time.